Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're wading into something that, well, it feels a lot like a modern Cold War.
But fought with silicon, not steel.
Exactly. We're talking about the U.S.-China technology rivalry. It's expanding fast, supercomputing, AI, and especially semiconductors.
All right.
And if you want a perfect snapshot of this, look at this case study we've got. Nexperia.
Ah, yes, Nexperia.
A chip maker based in the Netherlands, but, and this is key, owned by a Chinese firm.
Right.
Then, mid-October 2025, boom. The Dutch government announces a temporary takeover, citing, national security.
Which is pretty unprecedented. It really pulls back the curtain on the sheer pressure being applied right now.
How so?
Well, Europe's always tried to be this sort of neutral economic hub, right?
Mm-hmm.
But now it's getting squeezed hard between the U.S. and China.
So it's becoming the main stage for this fight.
It really is. It's the arena. So our mission today is to take this Nexperia thing, this specific event, and really unpack it. We need to understand the mechanics, the sort of technical details of the international pressure involved.
Yeah.
Why this company? Why now?
And what China's reaction means for Europe, and maybe even for you listening.
Precisely.
Okay, let's get into those mechanics. So the Dutch government takes temporary control. They use existing laws, national security stuff. Sounds straightforward, right? An internal Dutch thing.
On the surface, yes. But analysts pretty much immediately pointed to Washington. The influence was, let's say, significant.
So it wasn't just the Dutch acting alone.
Not really, no.
Yeah.
The U.S. Department of Commerce, they didn't make a formal demand, more like a strong suggestion, a warning, really.
The warning about what?
They basically said, look, if you don't get the Chinese representatives off Nexperia's board, that company could very well end up on the U.S. entity list.
Whoa, the entity list. That's usually for Chinese firms, maybe Iranian. Why target a Dutch-based company?
That's the critical part. It's about how interconnected the semiconductor industry is. Being on that list is, well, it's catastrophic.
Why? What does it actually do?
It instantly cuts you off. No access to U.S. origin technology, software, components. Think about it, the design tools, simulation software, testing equipment.
The stuff you need to actually make advanced chips.
Exactly. Often from U.S. companies like Cadence or Synopsys. So you lose access, you get no software updates, maybe your global partners freeze up. It's a death sentence, commercially.
But Nexperia is Dutch. How could the U.S. list them?
That's the 50% rule. If a company is more than half owned by an entity that could be listed or is connected to one, it becomes vulnerable itself.
And Nexperia was majority owned by a Chinese firm.
Precisely. So the U.S. didn't even need to actually list them, just a credible threat of doing so.
Yeah.
That was enough leverage to force the Dutch government's hand, or at least Nexperia's structure change.
That makes sense. A structural vulnerability. And this isn't just theoretical, is it? We've seen the U.S. use this economic weapon before.
Oh, absolutely. The threat is very real. You just have to look back a few years. Remember ZTE? Back in 2018, U.S. export bans completely shut down their supply chain. They had to pay massive fines just to get back online.
Right. I remember that.
And Huawei, probably the biggest example, lost access to TSMC for cutting-edge chips. Their smartphone business tanked. 5G got blocked almost everywhere outside China.
And even China's own big chip maker, CESAC.
Yep, CESAC too. Squeezed hard in 2022, especially on getting the advanced manufacturing equipment they needed. So the Dutch government, seeing these precedents, they knew the potential damage to the Nexperia was immense.
So resistance was kind of futile?
Pretty much. The path of least resistance was compliance.
And the outcome was the Chinese CEO suspended, a Dutch administrator put in charge.
Correct. Legally sound under Dutch law, invokes supply security, but also conveniently perfectly aligned with what the U.S. wanted.
Compliance achieved, but I imagine Beijing wasn't too happy.
Happy? No. Furious is probably closer. The foreign ministry response was immediate, sharp. Called it politicizing trade, infringing on ownership rights. Basically a violation of international economic norms. Standard rhetoric, but with real anger behind it.
Okay, so diplomatic anger. But did they do anything? Tangible retaliation.
Oh, yes. This wasn't just words. The retaliation hit European businesses directly.
Yeah.
Two main things, based on the documents. First, Beijing hit pause on exports of certain chips made by Nexperia in its Chinese factories. Dongguan, Shanghai, Shenzhen.
Wait, Nexperia chips made in China?
Yeah. So they choked off supply coming from China, hitting European customers, especially electric vehicles and factory automation. Big users of those kinds of chips.
Wow. Okay, what was the second thing?
That was a bigger strategic move. They tighten controls on rare earth exports.
Rare earths. Okay, that sounds serious.
It is. We're talking 17 elements crucial for, well, everything high-tech. Chips, powerful magnets, EV batteries, wind turbines.
And China's position theirs?
Dominant. Utterly dominant. They control something like 80% of global output. Maybe more for processed rare earths.
80%. So tightening those exports. That's major leverage, isn't it? Especially with Europe pushing hard on EVs.
Exactly. The timing hurt. Reports came out showing German and French car plants were scrambling, facing potential slowdowns because they couldn't get the materials.
And what about Nexperia itself back in the Netherlands?
Their support plants, Eindhoven, Nijmegen, they were running a reduced capacity. Why? Because of shortages caused by China's export controls. The cost was estimated in the hundreds of millions of euros monthly.
Just from this one incident?
Just from this one incident. It perfectly illustrates the price Europe pays for being stuck in the middle. The U.S. achieves an objective curbing Chinese tech influence, but Europe bears the immediate economic brunt.
Okay, so Nexperia wasn't just a one-off crisis. It feels like a template, part of a much bigger strategy.
That's a good way to put it, a blueprint.
So let's zoom out, the macro strategy. Europe is the main arena now.
Yeah, the U.S. approach is pretty clear. It's coordinated. It blends diplomacy with economic levers. It feels very much like a modern Cold War playbook. Aimed at preventing China from making deeper strategic inroads in Europe, especially in technology and critical infrastructure. Washington sees any major Chinese foothold here as, frankly, a threat to U.S. tech leadership globally.
So is the U.S. trying to pull Europe into its own tech alliances, formal structures?
Definitely. Look at the efforts to align Europe with things like the Chip 4 alliance. That's U.S., South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, key chip players.
Right.
And then there's the TTC, the Trade and Technology Council. That's basically a U.S.-EU forum to sync up policies, especially on things like export controls, limiting tech transfer to China. It's all about alignment.
And how do they persuade European companies who might, want to keep doing business with China? What's the stick?
The stick is simple.
Yes.
Access. Access to the U.S. market, access to U.S. technology and components. If you partner too closely with Chinese firms in sensitive areas, think telecoms, AI, maybe even clean energy, you risk getting cut off. You risk sanctions.
Like the Huawei situation again.
It's exactly like Huawei. U.S. pressure mounted. And European governments, European companies like Nokia and Ericsson, they backed away from deals. Even though Huawei was and is a huge player, the U.S. risk was just too high.
Looking across Europe, are some countries feeling this pressure more than others?
Oh, absolutely. The Netherlands, obviously, is ground zero because of ASML.
The company that makes the unique machines for advanced chips.
The only company, yeah. EUV lithography, crucial for chips under 7 nanometers. The U.S. has been pressuring The Hague since around 2020 to block sales of these machines to China. That's cost the Dutch economy billions already.
Billions. Who else is feeling the heat?
Germany. Definitely Germany. Washington is pushing Berlin hard to, let's say, reassess its deep ties with China, especially in EVs and renewables, areas where China is incredibly strong.
And German industry is heavily invested in China.
Massively.
Yeah.
Think Volkswagen, Bosch, Siemens, tens of billions invested. They now face this horrible choice: risk U.S. penalties or risk losing access to the world's biggest market in China. It's an awful strategic dilemma.
So there's the paradox. The U.S. frames this as, protecting global security, protecting allies.
Right.
But Europe is the one paying the immediate economic price, losing autonomy, losing access to growth markets in Asia. It's like Europe is subsidizing U.S. strategic goals.
That sums it up pretty well. The cost is measured in lost deals, supply chain chaos, and companies like Nexperia getting caught in this geopolitical vice.
Which logically brings us to the final part, Europe's response. What can they actually do from this tight spot? Are they trying to build their own strength? Self-reliance?
They are trying. The most visible sign is the European Chips Act. Big money. Over 43 billion allocated to boost chip production within Europe.
We've heard about new factories, right?
Fabs. Yes. Major projects announced. France, Germany partnering with big names. Intel, STMicroelectronics, Global Foundries, trying to bring manufacturing back or onshore it.
And it's not just chips.
No, there's also this wider Made in Europe 2030 push.
Yeah.
Trying to develop homegrown leaders in AI, clean energy, EVs.
Yeah.
Basically the key future industries.
Sounds ambitious, but what are the hurdles? Why isn't it happening faster?
Well, there are funding gaps, sure, and some core technology gaps too. But honestly, the biggest challenge, political fragmentation within Europe itself.
Oh, so?
China acts with a unified state direction. the U.S. can mobilize federal funds quickly. Europe. Europe has 27 member states. Germany prioritizes its car industry. France guards its nuclear tech. Eastern European countries might lean more on Chinese investment.
So national interests get in the way of a unified European strategy.
They often do. It makes it much harder to act decisively as a single bloc, especially compared to the U.S. or China.
Is there resistance from outside Europe, too? Does the U.S. want Europe to be fully autonomous?
That's a really interesting question. Publicly, they support a strong Europe, but privately, full European tech autonomy might challenge the U.S. role as the main security guarantor.
So Washington prefers Europe to stay aligned, maybe dependent.
It seems that way sometimes. Look at the pushback when Germany considered Huawei for 5G warnings from the White House. Or the criticism countries like Hungary or Slovakia face when they strike big deals with Chinese EV battery makers. Any sign of strategic drift towards Beijing gets pushed back.
So Europe is really boxed in. Pressure from the U.S., internal divisions.
It's a genuine bind, which leads to these sort of tentative paths forward you see emerging.
Like what?
Well, you hear France and Germany talking about Europe as a third pole, allied with the U.S. on security, but maybe less confrontational with China on trade, trying to carve out some space.
While other countries just keep trading.
Yeah, you see Italy, Spain, others trying to maintain pragmatic economic ties with Beijing where possible. It's not a unified front.
But to really escape this Nexperia scenario, to have genuine neutrality, that must come down to building real internal strength, doesn't it?
Absolutely. That's the core requirement. You need independent capability, more R&D, diverse supply chains, maybe aiming for your own breakthrough technologies.
A second ASML, a European TSMC.
Something like that. That's the kind of ambition policymakers talk about. Without that kind of indigenous strength, Europe likely remains this contested space, this battleground, constantly navigating these pressures, often paying an economic price for security alignment determined elsewhere.
So this deep dive really crystallizes the costs, doesn't it? Without that genuine self-sufficiency, that tech independence, Europe risks just being the field where larger powers play out their strategies.
Trading away economic opportunity for geopolitical alignment, essentially.
And paying a premium for it.
Exactly. Which leads us to that final provocative thought for you to mull over.
Go on.
If these big European initiatives, the CHIPS Act, made in Europe, if they get bogged down by those internal national squabbles or slowed by external U.S. pressure, if building that homegrown tech power takes too long,
Yeah.
how long can Europe really afford to prioritize its existing defense alliances over achieving genuine tech self-sufficiency before its actual economic weight, its global influence, starts to permanently decline? Something to think about as this tech rivalry continues to reshape our world.